campus had a rule that every letter was to be responded to in some way. And so it was quite the challenge. I don't know how they were able to do that. I only served in the office for a few hours a day, but that was quite the summer. And at the end, the staff director said, well, Bill, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I said, well, I've been thinking about joining VISTA. And I said, John, his name was John. I said, do you know VISTA? He said, oh, the senator knows it. The senator will get you in. And I said, no, I'll get, in those days you had to get about a dozen references of people who thought you could do the assignment. And I said, well, I can work on that. And so went in, and it's an experience. It's still with me. You get buzzed through 3 or 4 gates. And obviously you have to be cleared for security. And then you're in this room with 15 guys, and many of them were at my age, and they would never be outside again.
It's wild.
They were serving life sentences, and for some very heinous crimes. And here I was for 90 minutes. And so what do you do? And so I learned a lot about, not that I had any formal training in it, but it was group dynamics. There was a couple of tense moments there when the toughest guy said, so what are you going to do about it, Bill? I think part of it, Nikki, was the realization, I guess, that you don't do things alone or on your own. I mean, you may, at the end of the day, may be the one who has to speak the word or find the truth, but you don't do this by yourself. And I guess one of the takeaways I got from my VISTA experience was giving credit to all the people who, quite frankly, put up with me. We had unemployment rates that were in the 30%, insured unemployment rates. So these were folks who were receiving unemployment compensation, so we could actually see that. So how do we engage folks, all kinds of folks being laid off? I said we could have the service corps composed of individuals who were laid off.
Computer. Okay, folks, we are back with our very own superstar AmeriCorps alum, Bill Basl. This gentleman has touched almost every type of service from all different stratospheres. I told Bill when he got on the Zoom call today that I felt like I was interviewing a movie. And I'm really, really excited for this conversation. We've already had some great exchanges before I hit record. So I know Bill is going to enlighten us with stories of the past and also what the future may look like for AmeriCorps alums, national service and volunteerism, and the entire landscape. Not to put too much on your shoulders, Bill. You're carrying us into the future.
It's a good challenge to have.
But just a couple accolades that I want to say is, as we know, this is the AmeriCorps Connections podcast, and I interview AmeriCorps alum. And Bill is an AmeriCorps alum from VISTA back in 1970. So we're going to hear about, the Wild West of AmeriCorps. Before there were so many CFRs, we had so many numbers to remember. But Bill also served in the White House as CNCS Director of AmeriCorps. CNCS has rebranded and announced the AmeriCorps agency, but that's a whole other topic. But along the way, Bill, you also created and founded the Washington Service Corps, the Veterans Corps. You stood up the Washington Commission on National Community Service back in 1993. And you also served as a past chair on the American Association of State Commissions, also known as ASK. We love ASK. Anybody in the national service sphere loves ASK. And you were also awarded the White House Champion of Change. So super honored to have you on this podcast today. Let's go way back. Let's go back to your VISTA year. What was going on during that time? And what was the call to service for you for your VISTA year?
Well, I have to say that it's going way back into late 1960s, early 1970s. And the big event at that time was obviously the Vietnam War. And the campus I went to, and it was no different than other campuses in terms of what happened on campus in terms of protests. But I think what I saw was what can you do to make a contribution? And I had been kicking around this idea during, I guess, my junior and senior year at college. One of the summer volunteer gigs that I did was I served in the office of the late Senator Claiborne Pell. Senator Pell from Rhode Island of the Pell Grants. He was the one who put that whole concept together. I served in his office in Rhode Island during the summer, um, in the mornings, and then I worked in the evenings. And it was an opportunity to see the workings of a U.S. senator in his Senate office, but also to get a perspective on what was the concern of the American public. And my job there was to organize all the letters the senator was receiving from his constituents concerning the war in Vietnam. And the letters for someone as young as I was then were quite personal and also very heartbreaking. Uh, but families who had lost a son, families who had a son who came back from the war very disabled, individuals who didn't know what it was all about and was it worth it. And so the challenge I had was to sort those letters out and try to figure out ways to draft correspondence for others to look at, for the senator to ultimately respond to. The office had a rule that every letter was to be responded to in
Wow.
some way. And so it was quite the challenge. I don't know how they were able to do that. I only served in the office for a few hours a day, but that was quite the summer. And at the end, the staff director said, "Well, Bill, what are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to, I've been thinking about joining VISTA." And I said, "John," his name was John. I said, "Do you know VISTA?" He said, "Oh, the senator knows that the senator will get you in." And I said, "No, I'll give," in those days you had to get about a dozen references of people who thought you could do the assignment. And I said, "Well, I can work on that." He said, "Oh no, we'll help you. We'll make sure this happens." And it was a good thing because I don't know what went on in the background, but certainly it was a shock to me that I was selected so quickly after I completed my studies. I didn't even go to graduation. I went and I just completed all my classwork, and that was it. And the next month, I was on a plane to the West Coast to VISTA training. And in those days, you went through 2.5 weeks of in-service in training at a college campus at the University of Oregon. And then we went out to our assignments. We selected the assignment we wanted to take on. And at that time, the assignment that appealed to me was helping individuals begin their small businesses and help them apply for and receive loans from the Small Business Administration. And the groups I was primarily working with were migrant farm workers. And so here is someone who does not speak Spanish at all, trying to work with a group of folks whose Spanish is their first language. And so it was a great educational experience. And hopefully for them, it was an opportunity to receive some of the capital they needed to begin their dream, run their own business. And so those businesses were setting up a bakery, which was very successful, buying the equipment to do something called custom farming. And in those days, what it meant was you were hired out with your equipment, your tractor and implements to farm, to do the work, to prepare the land so someone could grow the crops. And you went from farm to farm to farm rather than the stoop labor that most of these folks were doing, picking crops, hoeing vegetables. They were now driving, had the equipment to drive the equipment. And certainly they knew what they needed to do to get the job done. And so having those kind of experiences in working with a federal agency, the Small Business Administration, and it was a learning experience also because of the way in those days the SBA was doing loans to first-time business people, but you had to make an appointment at the Chamber of Commerce to get an appointment. And so there was always this question, why don't people show up? Well, people didn't know where the Chamber of Commerce was, at least the groups I was working with. And the second thing, it was pretty intimidating. And so and so part of my job was to try to make that experience workable as best as possible, to do some of the translation as feebly as I could. And, at the end, help them when they would get the small business loan, provide, some of the counsel from others about how to find a business location, a site to do this, buy the equipment, set the operation up and help them see success. And so that was just the formal experience, but then I had other experiences in the community, helping setting up a legal aid office that in those days, the Legal Services Corporation didn't exist, but I had befriended some attorneys who were willing to share some of their time to help people on small legal issues. And so I had become known that I had an interest in that. And so we started to set up a legal aid office that uh, our former governor, Dan Evans, who turned 100 and just recently passed away last year. Dan Evans was there and cut the ribbon to open up the legal aid office in Walla Walla, Washington.
Well, I'm going to pause you right there because there's so many things that I want to point out really quick. So some of the people that watch the AmeriCorps Connections podcast are individuals that really don't know anything about AmeriCorps, or sometimes somebody's aunt or uncle or watching or listening to the podcast, and they may have gone through an AmeriCorps year and they share the podcast and like, just listen to a couple of these things. So one of the things I want to double click on is that you mentioned that you went from the East Coast to the West Coast. So number one, VISTA, there are opportunities to relocate. And number two, you mentioned that your main project was supporting these small farmers, but that you had opportunities to work on other things. And I think that is so important. And I if anybody takes anything away from this, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of nuggets, but understand that doing an AmeriCorps year, yes, you have your primary project, but during your entire service year, there's opportunities to learn new things, learn new skills, try things out, because you're only there for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Sometimes you take on another service year or 2 or 3, but you're only there for a year. So it's not like a job where you're showing up and you got to prove yourself every day. It's like the position is about learning and expanding, not just the program, but yourself. And I think that what you shared is a perfect reflection of opportunity that you had to not just focus on that one project, but to try some of the other things.
So one of the experiences I had that was that I was totally unprepared for, but I went forward on, was in Walla Walla. A person who I knew that worked at the Community Action Agency where I was assigned shared with me that she was going to a program at the state penitentiary, and would I like to go with her? She worked in probation and parole, and just to kind of meet some of the folks who were there. And so I did, and I didn't realize that she was a lead person who talked to a group called Lifers with Hope. It was
Wow.
folks who were serving life sentences. And so I went, and then the next week she said, "Well, I can't make it. Can you handle the small group discussion?" And so from that point on,
How old were you?
all of 22.
Oh, my goodness.
And so at that time, I said, yes. I guess that's one of I kind of say yes a lot. And so I said I would do it. And so went in for, and it's an experience that is still with me. You get buzzed through 3 or 4 gates, and obviously you have to be cleared for security. And then you're in this room with 15 guys, and many of them were at my age, and they would never be outside again.
It's wild.
They were serving life sentences, and for some very heinous crimes. And here I was for 90 minutes. And so what do you do? And so yeah, I learned a lot about, not that I had any formal training in it, but it was group dynamics. There was a couple of tense moments there when the toughest guy said, "So what are you going to do about it, Bill?" And once you get the meeting started, I noticed that the guards kind of faded away. They had like a 90-minute break.
You're all, excuse me.
Yeah. And so, but at the end of the day, what we tried to work towards was that you will never, yes, you will never get out, but what you can do is help the other guys who are here who are serving 5, 10 year sentences, how to how to get them prepared to go back into society. What have
Mm.
you learned about yourself and how to help others go forward and live a life after they serve your sentence, even though you will die here. You will never leave here.
I can't think of a more intense scared straight program than having a 22-year-old go into a life or prison, facilitate a mindset conversation. That is amazing. And it just, when you're serving in AmeriCorps year, sometimes you're put in a situation where you're like, I don't really know how to do this, but it's just like our pledge says. Well, the VISTA pledge is a little bit different than the AmeriCorps pledge, but faced with adversity, we persevere. There's a project that needs to be done. There's people that need to be helped, and I'm going to figure it out. So, how did your service year culminate? So, after your VISTA service year, or what was the crescendo of that service year? What was your biggest memory takeaway?
Well, I would say that one was figuring out what happens when you take a stand.
Mm.
And just because you think you're doing the right thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that other people believe the same thing. And so I helped some migrant farm workers needed some commodity food because they were there to cut asparagus, and the asparagus hadn't come up yet, and so they had no way of making money. So it's like a food bank. We were able to help them with some food, and then going forward, I became a Vista leader. Uh,
Oh, okay. You did 2 years then.
Yeah, so, and that was, north in Spokane. It was where I was housed, but, um, helping support vistas in Eastern Washington. And from that's the perspective where I came to help other individuals, Vista attorneys, and we found that there was no legal representation for folks in these small towns, and that's where we began setting up something called Eastern Washington Legal Services, which was the predecessor to the National Legal Services Program. And that's how, kind of got involved in some of this work. But at the end of the day, it was to provide representation to a large degree for individuals who in civil proceedings that had no one to represent them. And this was primarily, landlord tenant issues, purchasing a car, and all kinds of things that folks got themselves into that where they didn't have the legal protections of the law explained to them in a way so that they could make an informed decision.
So, did you have I didn't even ask. So, when you graduated in Rhode Island, did you what did you study law?
No, it was just something I kind of fell into. Um,
Wow.
and I enjoyed it. I mean, it was, because I could see the Vista attorneys that I worked with, very, very dedicated group who did a lot of groundbreaking, building a legal precedent for people who had been denied any kind of representation. And it was from those experiences that I ended up moving and getting a job in the mid 1970s in Olympia in the state capitol to help set up the funding that the state legislature provided to fund civil legal representation in the state and
Wow.
administered that for a year or so. So,
That is, yeah, if this was like a 4-hour interview, I guess I would go down so many rabbit holes with that. I think that something captures us, whether it's during our service year, or maybe it's just like in whatever, some volunteering, or maybe it's our job. But something captures us, and it's almost like an itch where I'm like, yeah, that I just need to follow that. That doesn't sound right to me. That doesn't seem right to me. I'm gonna keep going down, and it sounds like you really did just no. I'm not gonna settle with. Almost like kept moving the goalpost.
right.
Where you're like, yeah, but no, I want them here now. Yeah, but no, I want more. And uh, it just sounds like during your Vista year, you really had an opportunity to explore all of these different avenues. So then you served as a leader, so you were supporting other members to do other things, which is a whole other leadership management thing in and of itself. How did you fall into the rest of your career after your Vista year? What did you carry with you? And what were your main values that you learned from your Vista year that you brought through that experience with standing up the commission at Washington and all of the other things that you so amazingly did?
I think I think part of it, Nikki, was the realization, I guess, that you don't do things alone or on your own. I mean, you may, at the end of the day, may be the one who has to speak the word or find the truth, but you don't do this by yourself. And I guess one of the takeaways I got from my Vista experience was all the people, giving credit to all the people who, quite frankly, put up with me. That- I, I mean, you can be kind of, you kind of walk down this road where it's pretty easy for you to see right and wrong, uh, because you haven't had that experience in life of seeing different shades of gray or how the law could be applied or not. And so if you're pretty strident in what you're looking at, you become pretty difficult to deal with at times. And I was very fortunate to have not so supervisors in Vista who stood behind me and thought, this is what a Vista does. They can make waves at times. And I needed that support. That was very helpful because some of the stuff I did, I know I was reported on, turned in, no question about it. But Vista stood for me and stood up for me. And at the Community Action Agency, so many people with big hearts, so many people who, even today, many of them obviously have passed on, but who opened their doors for dinner, good conversation, I mean, it was that kind of experience where it was a community that was really supportive, and Waldo was that community. It was a very, very supportive place to serve. And then being a Vista leader, I was kind of traveling a little bit more in Eastern Washington. And then the group that we were working with was able to get the legislature to provide some funding for a planning grant. And so I need to hire someone to put this whole concept together, which was me, which is how I found my way into state government.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how working in the state. And I always had these other kinds of experiences, but I was working in primarily what was called employment and training. After the legal services program got up and going, I was hired it was the Department of Labor funded activities. It was mostly working with folks who were out of work, out of jobs, and trying to help communities build the training programs that would enable them to find a job and to build the workforce in communities around state, primarily areas that didn't have much of a trained workforce, which is why they couldn't attract many companies or businesses. So how do you put that together?
I just put that together. I love how I just put that together. So you did stand up the Washington Commission on National Service and Volunteerism. That was in the 90s. That's when VISTA, is the right word precludes? Is that the right word? VISTA came before AmeriCorps.
Right.
VISTA came right after. So Peace Corps, and then it was VISTA. Well, first it was the CCC, which you have to share that story. Then Peace Corps, then VISTA, and then down the road was AmeriCorps and CCC, blah, blah, blah. So that I remember I did service in Governor Hogan's in Maryland's Office of Service and Volunteerism, and we had a demonstration program, Volunteer Maryland, and I was director of that program for I think 2 or 3 years. And it was one of the demonstration programs when Bill Clinton was like, make this happen. And it was under Governor Schaefer. And that office had to be stood up with programs, with members, with sites in like 9 months. With like this nebulous of we don't really know what AmeriCorps is, but this is kind of what we want to do. So you were part of that wave. You were a part of that, like, let's make this happen ish. Like, what is this? So what was that time like? Because I think the universe protected everybody that I was not involved in that, because I would have hit the ground running and had so much fun putting that together. So what was that energy like when I think it was President Clinton signed the bill that funded AmeriCorps?
Right. And that was in 1993. And I had been working with the state of Washington. And in 1982, 10 years before, uh, the deputy director of the agency I was working in said that the governor had some extra funding in the state revenue forecast that we didn't know we'd have. Do you have something that you like to propose? And I said, well, let's propose our own Washington Service Corps. And it was the parallel to the Conservation Corps. So we proposed both a Conservation Corps, and the Service Corps was to provide individuals, kind of like VISTA, who would work on community projects and help communities during that recession that began in our state in 1982, 83. We had unemployment rates that were in the 30%, insured unemployment rates. So these were folks who were receiving unemployment compensation. So we could actually see that. So how do we engage folks, all kinds of folks being laid off? And I said, we could have the Service Corps composed of individuals who were laid off and help them rebuild their communities. So it was it was kind of fascinating, but we got $7 million to put this together back in 1983 in the budget. 5 million for the Conservation Corps and 2 million for the Service Corps. A concept, not even something that you could look
Even
at.
a lot now. You know what I mean? Like I know people are throwing billions and trillions around,
Right.
which I don't understand. I'm like, what? How did we get from million? But even back in the 80s, that's a big amount.
It was a big amount, and it was my first experience in terms of working in the legislature, meeting with there was the chairs of the various appropriations committee, and the one of the chairs of the Senate Appropriations Committee, his administrative assistant would then become the governor. We had a meeting, and I was to make the pitch for how much money we wanted, and I made the pitch. And the late Governor Mike Lowry was this administrative assistant. He said, I said, well, Mike, how did it go? And he said, well, the chairman had a much smaller idea on money, Bill, on money than you did, Bill. And so it was, and you kind of get a sense for, and in those days, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee after lunch always had a tradition of smoking a big cigar, and you just kind of followed the smokes, see, and it was an experience that you had to kind of go through, but the idea was to keep coming back and answer all the questions. But we had a service corps that kicked off in 1983. In August of 83, it was like 4 months after the legislature adjourned. And that helped give us the experience to what in 1993 Bill Clinton would be interested in. And there were people along the way, like former Representative Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta was a member of Congress during that time, and it was called the Panetta Bill. And in those days, you wrote, on a letter to members of Congress, and we talked to Representative Panetta, who was a strong supporter of national service. He always was. He was at Bill Clinton's side for a lot of he was the chief of staff in the White House. And so, but before that, he was a member of Congress, and John Cyberlink, who was a representative from Ohio, in about 1986, when Nixon was president, we had would have been a national service bill. It would pass the House and the Senate thanks to John Cyberlink. And on the night of October 31st, Ronald Reagan pocket vetoed the bill.
Mm.
And so that was in the mid 1980s, 86. And basically saying it was unnecessary. It was a duplication of effort, which there was nothing else quite like it, but that was the way it was conveyed. And so we had to start all over again. It wasn't until the Clinton administration, 1992, 93, the AmeriCorps passed and legislation was set up, and we had the summer of service before, and off we went.
I have a hard left that I want to just ask really quick because I'm as I'm listening to your trajectory of service, I feel like there's an underlying value of service that you have that's so deep within your person. And I'm just curious where that came from. Does that make sense?
Sure.
You're like tying everything back where, you know, the Pell Grant should be linked to service and people should have service. And where did that come from? And I know that you had mentioned the Vietnam War at the beginning, but what? That's
I know. I think part of it was just being blessed with some parents that grew up in the Depression era parents who, uh, in our house, nothing was ever thrown out or wasted. Um, they remembered standing in lines,
wow.
ration cards, rationing of gasoline, rationing of food. And so part of that was also looking out for others, you know. So if you had the gas card, but you didn't have a car, maybe you gave that gas ration card to the neighbor who had a car, and then together you could pick up the food for everyone in the neighborhood. There's a way of looking out for others. And my mom's father was a coal miner. He worked in coal mines in Western Pennsylvania. And when he was 14 and 15, and then there was a mine shaft collapse and it broke his leg severely, and he decided he didn't want to work in the mines anymore. And so he worked for the post office. But it was steady work, and that's how that family weathered the storm of the Depression. And then my dad did all kinds of jobs to keep things going. His father passed away early in life, and he eventually got a job in the police department. But then he was drafted and served in World War II in the Southwest Pacific. So life wasn't fair all the way around, a lot of folks. So anyway, and he was the sole support of his mother.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I have heard a saying, and it might be controversial, but I've heard that hard times build strong, and I'm just going to say people because it's not just men, right? Hard times build strong people, and strong people build good times, and then good times build weak people, and weak people build hard times. And I feel like we're at a really interesting point that I can't recall. I'm in my 50s. I'm putting it out there on the podcast. I'm going to be 50 this year, 2025. I don't recall conversations. I do recall my grandmother talking about stepping up when the boys were at war. And I do know that my grandfather was injured in Normandy and he had a bullet hole in his back. And I do recall that. And I do recall my grandmother talking about times of stepping up when the boys were at war. But I grew up in good times, right? Like things were pretty easy in my life in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So I think that there is, I don't know, I feel like there's a gap in this, what it's like to not have at our fingertips Uber Eats and Amazon and all the things that we can just get dropped at our door. And I think that we really need to take a pause and think about how we are helping and supporting each other. And I think that this conversation really comes at a timely moment. I really appreciate your transparency and your honesty about what brought you into this service and this equity for people.
Well, I think too, Nikki, there's these two words that are used a lot to validate someone's opinion. And the two words are called lived experience. My lived experience. And is the lived experience exchanging information with only with someone at a screen that where you remain anonymous and you can
Yes.
say anything you want without any consequences. And it's not just stirring the pot, but doing it in such a way that creates elements of distrust, of criticisms, without any value, of principles that are out principles of fairness. Um, and so I think sometimes we need to figure out a way to step back and
Yes.
think about what that additional keystroke is saying, or how you're going to get to someone, or where you find comfort living not in reality, but in some made up situation outside of the normal way people kind of function. And I don't mean normal and just traditional. I mean, dealing with critical issues, whether they're health and safety issues or the economy, or trying to figure out a way where folks can have a shot at going forward in life. And where is that? And I think that's where I think there's value in national service, but because it provides many of us a front row seat. And for many, many more of us, we get our hands dirty. And for some of us too, we get our hearts broken. And, thinking of some activity or project that will truly make the difference, and a decision maker says no, or the grant that doesn't come in, the grant is denied, or the request is denied, or the supervisor said, no, we're not doing that for whatever reason. So then what do we do? And I think, what I've tried to do is in different ways is where we see an obstacle, how do we go forward?
So I don't want to glaze over this super important conversation that we're having. And I think that we do need to dig deep. I think we're at a point where we need to dig deep. I'm going to fast forward us, and I'm going to just leapfrog over all of the impact that you've had at the national level, at the commission level. Again, you served on America's Service Commission chair. I want to talk about the National Museum and Center for Service. And we're really fast forwarding, folks. Like, if Bill lets me, I'm going to do another follow-up, and we're going to fill in that gap between VISTA leader to this point. But I want to start to land the plane with this concept of the National Museum and Center for Service, which is kind of a concept, but it also has been realized in some areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that is important?
Well, it's important because I think it's one of those opportunities that truly can bring the country together. And when I say the country, I mean all aspects of the country. It's an idea that began with former Washington Congressman Brian Baird, who served in the U.S. Congress in the early 2000s, 1999 to about 2010. Interestingly enough, Congressman Baird, when I was the head of the State Commission for National Service in Washington State, where we had AmeriCorps members, Congressman Baird never missed a chance to come out and visit AmeriCorps members and his district and see what they were doing and heard what they were doing. And Brian's interest is to figure out a way to bring the country closer together by having this National Museum and Center for Service. The idea being that there would be places, not just one place in Washington, D.C., which we'll talk about, but places in every community, whether it's at a library or at a city hall or a county office, where you can come in and actually see and be engaged by pictures and videos and information about people in your neighborhood, on your street even, who are making a difference every day that you may not even know about. And the invitation, obviously, there is to join in and to be part of it. And so, as you know, in Washington, D.C., there is a prototype of the museum and maybe you can help me here, at the branch of the Washington, D.C. Library. And at the museum, at the library, I should say, there are photos and some, not a whole lot of script, but some description of the photos, but also this opportunity to hopefully stimulate folks to serve and to make contributions in their communities. We're hoping to have a permanent site in Washington, D.C., where folks can come to the National Museum and Center for Service. And if it works, to also have it be the location for, as you mentioned earlier, America's Service Commissions have an office there, Voices for National Service,
Oh,
and
wow.
other organizations where they can be in one building, so to speak, and where we can share common space, like an auditorium or places for meetings, places to gather. Um, we don't need to keep paying the Hilton hotels and others for
Uh-huh.
all of our conferences and meetings when we could perhaps do that in one location if we had a big enough conference room and a place we would call home.
The the Hilton Hotel pillows are so wonderful.
Yeah.
I will say I was so pleased that I was invited in October 2024 to the MLK Museum in Washington DC to hear Brian Baird and all of the folks or many of the folks that are invested in this project talk about the launch of 250 and beyond. And one of the things that Congressman Baird said, and I think that this just I kind of want to shout it from the rooftops, is that he said you can go down any college campus or high school campus or wherever, and you see accolades of athletics and, then mathematics and all kinds of like awards about scientific discovery. But there's nothing of service. And I come from a background of service. I get it. I was like, wow, yeah, you know what? You're right. And service, like, I don't know if you've ever read the book Upstream from Dan Heath and his brother, which I can't remember his name. But it's basically about it's the whole concept of like, why are people falling in the river? Right? It's because the bridge is broken. We need to fix the bridge and then people won't fall in the river. Because people are falling in the river, we have to pull them out. So let's fix the bridge. Service fixes the bridges, and then people aren't falling in the river, and you don't have to pull people out of the river.
Right.
But it's hard to tell. It can be challenging to tell that story, and I think that this project helps bring some visuals, and the toolkit is helpful for folks to think about what is important in the storytelling of service. So I just wanted to point that out that that hit home, and it was such a visual of walking down and seeing like the Heisman Trophy,
Correct.
like, yeah, but where's the trophy of like, look at all things that I did?
Right. And I think what you're describing, Nikki, can be seen at the Lamont Riggs Library in Washington, D.C. That's the branch library, Lamont Riggs branch of the D.C. Public Library, where the exhibit is going on now, the prototype of the exhibit. And as you were talking about the bridge here, we also need bridge designers, and in addition to bridge builders, to think about how can service be a strategy, if you will, not just to get to the other side, but to include a lot of folks who kind of think about how to get to the other side. You know, so that we figure out how that all works. And our belief is that, as you said, that prototypes of the museum can be stood up in all kinds of public spaces in communities all over the country. What we hope at the museum is folks will be so interested, they'll say, well, how do I do that in Topeka, Kansas? And sure enough, you'd be able to get online right there and find opportunities and also see a perhaps, hopefully, if we're lucky, a mini museum in Topeka that recognizes folks who are serving and maybe talk about the history of service in Kansas. And I say Kansas because one of the strong promoters and supporters of national service was the late Senator Bob Dole. Senator
Yeah.
Dole from Kansas uh, did a lot to insert in AmeriCorps a focus on making sure folks with disabilities are not inadvertently left out of national service. And it's the Dole amendments in there that help make that happen. So anyway, there are a lot of folks that made those kinds of contributions, but I do think that the library or the museum can do that. And you said and beyond, we're going to be focusing in on the 250th anniversary of our country in next year, 2026. And um, and I think it's important for us to figure out a way to recognize what we've done and what we can go forward on. I'm old enough to remember what we did in the 200th anniversary of the country, and I think we can move forward from painting fire hydrants red, white, and blue. I think there is something to be said about how service begins to address not just the structural building of things, but how do we rebuild the human condition
Yeah.
and the human heart? Um, you, we've all been to many of these disasters, and I know many of those experiences holding people who are sobbing uncontrollably because they don't know what's going to happen next. Our AmeriCorps members are there mucking and gutting and cleaning out a home that has been in the family for generations. And so what do you say and what do you do and how do we go forward? I think it's important for us now to be able to show a way to go forward. And I think volunteerism and service is that pathway to do that.
I think that that's a perfect lead into my final question about this is the AmeriCorps Connections podcast. So everybody that has been interviewed on this podcast are alumni. As far as I know, there's about 1.3 million AmeriCorps alums strong or that have gone through the program. Obviously, not everybody's still around, but if you could give us a reflection of what you see for this massive cohort, that we're just peeling together. If you go on LinkedIn, there's an AmeriCorps alum group, and there's about 23,000 folks in there, maybe 29,000. That's a good number. But we're 1.3 million folks, and every year I think it's about 70,000, maybe a little bit more, that go through the program, and we keep building and building and building. I'm just wondering what your vision, we're advise us. What should we do?
Just a couple of things strike my mind, and one is trying to figure out a way to connect with folks that have served to be I don't know what to call it, advisors or helpers or supporters, cheerleaders, whatever we want to say, but individuals to acknowledge and support those folks who have stepped forward, who have raised their hand and have sworn to serve the country. And I guess the second part of it is it's just not a one-off.
Yeah.
The last line of the AmeriCorps oath, I will carry this commitment with me this year
during my sin and beyond. Exactly.
And I don't know if we've done in AmeriCorps, done a really good job of emphasizing to alums the last line of the oath we all took, carrying this commitment this year and beyond. And so how do we help folks carry the commitment this year and beyond? One way to do that, I think, is to actually show how people can go forward and be a partner, be a co-supporter maybe it's in the grants that are written for future AmeriCorps grants that they have to identify some AmeriCorps partners that
Yeah.
will you know that will be standard bearers, if you will, but folks who can support who who see the commitment. I think the third point I would make is to strengthen the outreach we do for folks that are 55 and over.
Mm.
I still think we have a public relations challenge that AmeriCorps people say that those AmeriCorps kids or AmeriCorps. We got to figure out a way to convey that AmeriCorps is for all.
Yep.
That if you happen to be over 55, you can give the education award to a child or a grandchild.
Yes.
That might be help. I don't, but we have no way of advertising that or getting that word out right now
I
online or whatever.
literally, yeah, I was literally in my 9 to 5, I was at a VISTA, like in service training. And we're in recruitment for the 25-26 year. And everybody was like, how should we market our recruitment? I'm like, market people who are not, they don't necessarily want to retire, but then they're at the age where they want to like retool and they can take their education award. They can get to, so I'll just share real quick and then we're going to land this plane. When I was the director for Volunteer Maryland, I had the loveliest woman serving in AmeriCorps. She had a pension from the state of Maryland, but she wanted to continue to do work. She served for 2 years. I can't remember the site she served in. She served for 2 years, and so she got an education award about 7,500 each year, and she gave that to her granddaughter. So that granddaughter had almost $14,000 going into her college year, and it was such a gift, and the member was so committed to her service because she was doing it for her grandchild. 100% agree. 100%. There's so many things that we can double down on that.
And one thing that we're facing today is the large number of federal employees being laid off.
Yes.
And maybe there's a way that we should reach out to those employees to serve in VISTA because there's a unique piece in the federal retirement system, FRS, that VISTA service counts as years served in the federal government. So there
Yeah.
may be a way that we should reach out to the federal employee organizations. And obviously, it's not about the money, but it never was.
Yeah.
But with VISTA, if you served a year or two, you would gain 2 more years
Yeah.
towards your federal retirement. And so if you were riffed or laid off at 15 years, serving 2 year, you're probably not going to get another federal position but 2 years in VISTA would give you 2 more years of federal service
Yeah.
towards your retirement. So it's just kind of a wonky kind of way
It
to
is.
to get to a group.
Yeah. I think this conversation really came in a good time. I do believe in synchronicities and, I was introduced to the National Museum and Center for Service. Um, Actually, Jason, I can't remember your last name. Do you remember Bill? He talks to me. We're serving on an alumni committee with Serve Share Alliance about this like 2 years ago, and I was like, I understand what you're talking about. And then I went to the in-person summit at MLK, and I was like, this is making more sense. And now I'm chomping at the bit because I just think that this is a good avenue. It seems like, the independent sector is interested in this. They're a big supporter of the project, and I'm not being paid for this ad for the museum, but I'm definitely a fan. And I think that the conversation, Bill, with you is timely, especially bringing up just kind of reminiscing over the history and how we got here and what are some things that we need to think about. As we wrap, is there anything else that you would like to share? And then if people want to get involved with anything that you're working on or anything, let's think about what that might look like.
So I think two things, Nikki. One is for the museum, definitely. Just folks can go online, the National Museum, nmcfs.org, and that's the website, nmcfs.org. And it's a good way to get information on the museum, what's it about. And there are ways to make contributions if folks want to make a financial contribution there. There are ways to connect and help set up an opportunity to maybe in a person's local library, or as you said, high school library, college library. There's opportunities there.
Bill, you have dropped so many nuggets. And again, I thank you so much for joining the podcast and again allowing this podcast to share your story and your trajectory. And we skipped over so many things. If
Mhm.
you are ever willing, I would
Sure.
love to do a follow-up where we just are like, tell us about Bill's journey. But I really wanted to get to the National Museum of Center for Service because it's kind of top of mind right now with the 250th
Right.
anniversary and this big push. Um, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope folks that have made it this far have felt like a bit of legacy with AmeriCorps, with VISTA, with national service. We didn't get to some of the stories that we wanted to get to, but this is deep in the core of the United States and we need to get back to it. And it's not about partisanship. It's not about what side you're on. We all want to support each other in the ways that contribute to thriving, human thriving, right? Anything else you want to add before I wrap?
No, I just wanted to thank you, Nikki. It's been a great opportunity to participate. You're doing great work by getting this information out. And if there is, opportunities to continue to go on in maybe a certain subject area or from a certain perspective, very happy to do that. And I think there is, obviously more work to do. But part of what sometimes is missing is the invitation.
Yeah.
It's the invitation to serve. It's the invitation to make a contribution. Because I think many of us feel kind of humble. Well, what can I do? I don't know too much. But indeed, we all have something unique that no one else has. And I think if we can figure out a way to bring those unique perspectives together, and that's what makes these service projects so delightful and enjoyable for the most part, is having folks who, and I've been with folks in elected positions who have never pounded a nail in their life, and
Wow.
here they are. And what you say is, "I'll hold the nail, you pound the nail," and of course, they're gonna miss. But, that's part of the experience is learning how to do these kinds, and also it gives folks a sense of it just doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
How does all this work and how does it happen? And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that no one's left behind, that somehow everyone feels like they've contributed and we're better off because, as they say, the sum is greater than the parts. And that's where we are.
Yep. I wrote down go alone, go fast, go together, go far. So
That's right.
if
Exactly.
you made it this far, my final words are find your purpose, follow your passion, and stay true to yourself. Bill, thank you so much for your time. And everybody that supports the AmeriCorps Connections podcast, thank you so much. And we'll be back with another guest